Hello, good morning and welcome. It's Monday, January the 12th. Keir Starmer's allies have been briefing that the turbulent world means the threat to his premiership is receding. With the US now threatening to intervene in Iran over the killing of protesters, there's no shortage of that turbulence. My name is Sam Coates of Sky News.
And I'm Anne McElvoy of Politico. The Prime Minister spent the first full week of 2026 making some pretty hefty commitments overseas. An open-ended new promise of troops in Ukraine if there is a ceasefire. Then, last week, Britain, France and Germany backing a joint NATO Arctic security mission designed to restrain Donald Trump, who says he wants to own Greenland.
And now with additional instability in the Middle East. Overnight, more evidence of deadly violence in Iran to suppress protesters. Leaders all around the world are having to come to terms with the possibility that the Islamic Republic of Iran could now be overthrown, with very little idea of what comes next. It would, of course, be a seminal event that would transform geopolitics and, because it's an oil-rich nation, the energy markets. But nobody can say at this point whether what comes next will be better or worse from any of them.
Keir Starmer will be out and about this morning at a cost of living event with Peter Kyle as the government promotes changes to paternity and bereavement leave. And we'll have more later on the massive row about social media and the idea of banning it for the under-16s. Which surprising figure has come out to support Kemi Badenoch on that? But Starmer's declaration that every minute not spent talking about the cost of living is a minute wasted is being brought into sharp relief and some challenge by broader events.
Yeah, there's been one big intervention since our last recording on Thursday, Anne. And while foreign affairs does dominate, as we've set out, there is a decidedly domestic element to all of that, and that is on defence spending. So before Christmas, you and Esther Webber were the first to say that there was a budget row and delay to the defence investment plan, which was meant to come before Christmas. Now, since Thursday, it's a hell of a chunky number, has been put on the size of that gap. On Thursday evening, the Times defence correspondent Larissa Brown put a number at 28 billion over 4 years. So between now and 2030, there is a £7 billion a year shortfall. And there's been drama too. Air Chief Marshal Sir Richard Knighton, the Chief of Defence Staff, has been in to tell this to Keir Starmer and John Healey and Rachel Reeves to deliver this number. Perhaps, unsurprisingly, Keir Starmer is said to have been deeply unhappy because he believed the recent SDR, Strategic Defence Review, had been fully costed. And this is one of your speciality topics. What do you make of what's going on, particularly at this turbulent time?
Well, simply put, Sam, there's a gap between the government's readiness to have the UK involved militarily in the wider world on a large scale and how the actual defence investment plan to fund that and also the defence of the United Kingdom itself is faring. And this seems to be a Whitehall story of many misunderstandings, some omissions and quite a lot of blame shifting now increasingly breaking out into public. So the Strategic Defence Review laid the ground for 2.6% rise in real terms by 2029, promised then to rise to 3.5%, quite a leap, by 2035, having made that pledge with other NATO countries last year. But you and I noticed, Sam, that the budget, the last one, was very scant on detail about the milestones. When would you get on the way to that? So what could you expect, and particularly what could be expected to be coming through for military spending and procurement purposes by what date? And you might ask, given Starmer's evident enthusiasm for supporting Ukraine going forward and being a key player in a significant military bloc to defend Europe, it's curious that he should be behind on these warnings about the MOD's ability to fund the actual spending commitments. So I've dug into that a bit, and so have some of my colleagues. And the answer seems to be that the Chancellor and the Treasury were not happy that the MOD hadn't factored in adequately defence inflation, which is pretty rampant and accounts for a lot of that 28 billion shortfall that you mentioned. When all of this escalated to the Prime Minister, the Treasury had said that they couldn't come to agreement on the figures that they had on the table. And according to sources familiar with the process, Keir Starmer was quite irritated. I've heard that more progress hadn't been made, that the costings were off beam. The defence investment plan has been delayed till spring, and now we are seeing armed forces bosses being rather vocal in their frustration about this. There are some who say, well, Keir Starmer should have joined the dots a lot earlier between commitments he's making on the global stage and day-to-day funding and the black hole at home. Some people saying he was disengaged from that detail because he was engrossed in the diplomacy. Number 10 might well counter, well, this is what you've got the Treasury and the Ministry of Defence for.
It's absolutely fascinating to me, not least because of the sort of sequence of events. Keir Starmer finds out there's a massive problem, but still feels that he has to make these big commitments on Ukraine and last week over the Arctic. Luckily, helpfully for us, this is all very relevant today, not least because of what's going on in Iran and with the Arctic, but also because the guy at the heart of the drama, Chief of the Defence Staff for Richard Knighton, the guy who had to tell the Prime Minister about the £28 billion black hole, is up before the Defence Select Committee today at 2 p.m. And given everything that's going on, I think actually that is at the highest end of most interesting Select Committee meetings that we could have. It's the first one that he's had in that job as well. So now you've put you've explained to us the sort of weighty treatment of all of this, but I just want to tell you a little anecdote, Anne, I heard from senior Whitehall figures at the end of last week about that sort of underlines how what's going on isn't totally in the government's grip. So a week ago, Home Office Minister Mike Tapp was the victim on the morning round of breakfast TV interviews, and he was asked about Greenland. And to the bafflement of just about everybody, he failed to give the government line. He didn't say what you meant to say, which is it's a matter for the people of Denmark and Greenland. And in fact, he refused to say anything that might restrain or imply the government would want to restrain Donald Trump. Now, you can see how a minister confronted with that he hadn't prepared on ended up in that space, but never mind. This generated a bit of a meltdown outside government. There was a 4-round news cycle about Britain not defending a NATO ally, and a huge amount of consternation inside government, inside the Foreign Office and elsewhere. Big dismay at what a minister had said. So, directly as a result of Mike Tapp's actions, I am told, the UK did something it perhaps normally wouldn't. And that afternoon signed up to a pan-European statement supporting Greenland and Denmark. Now, normally the UK just tries to avoid getting involved in particularly sharp differences between the US and the EU. But because of Tapp's intervention, they felt that they couldn't ignore it and risk inflaming the news cycle and looking like they weren't on Denmark's side. But inevitably, it had a consequence. Once it was published, it appeared to provoke the White House. And within hours, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, had hit back saying, and actually escalated herself, saying that the use of military force was on the table. So there you have examples of kind of individual ministers saying something bluntly careless, and then the consequence of that being our closest ally starting to talk about military action about a NATO country. It is quite something how chaotic I think things felt in government at points last week.
Oh, what a story of unintended consequences you've just given us. And you could say a big mistake by Mike Tapp, but also just obviously underprepared. So I think the blame probably goes a bit wider, and it's telling about the nervousness in government about losing that first friend status to Donald Trump while sticking to, as you describe it rightly, the formal UK position and legal position internationally on Greenland and Denmark. And that seems to me to be very symbolic of something that is just opening up, and it's the tension between Starmerism, that rules-based, quite legalistic view of foreign affairs, at a time when Donald Trump is disrupting that and ministers just getting caught there in the no man's land in the middle.
Right, there's quite a nice juncture there. We're going to go to domestic affairs, but talking of legalistic views and interpretations of foreign affairs, I give you the Attorney General, Lord Hermer. Now, his significance today, I think, really, is he's probably Keir Starmer's closest friend in the cabinet, I'd reckon. And he's been out and about yesterday.
At this rate, this might be quite a small group, but do go on.
Well, he was out and about manning the barricades on behalf of the Prime Minister, calling him, quote, the most resilient person I've ever met. So that's more grist to the idea that if Keir Starmer and his allies tell everybody that he's safer in position in number 10, then that becomes true. And to be fair to them, there is history in politics of you being able to talk yourself out of trouble, but we will wait and see. But there is some awkwardness and trickiness that number 10 and the government is going to have to manage today.
Indeed, because one of the big domestic items on the agenda will be how we handle social media. Two big angles come together on this today, Sam. The first is what the government intends to do about Elon Musk's Grok AI platform. After it emerged it could invent images of just about anyone in the nude or near nude. Ofcom is due to report imminently on this and the abuse of that. Liz Kendall for the government is holding out the possibility of a ban on the entire X platform as a last resort.
A ban on X. Can you imagine it? Can you imagine the American reaction to that? And, legally that, of course, would be incredibly hard. So my bet, Anne, is that it is very much a last resort and it's never going to happen. So if that's not a real threat, and I don't think it is, what are they going to do?
Well, now those powers to make the next rulings on this are in Ofcom's hands. The government is pledging its support for the regulator if indeed Ofcom suggests very stringent action. And Liz Kendall saying, as we went into the weekend, that she's expecting an update there from the regulator with an urgently expedited assessment. So she's really putting the pressure on a Monday morning. Our playbook suggesting she is prodding for that really in the next day or so, which does show, doesn't it, how the government is worried that this is running away from them and it will look at the mercy of events. But as you point out, any more aggressive action towards Elon Musk's X platform, well, it's going to make the Mike Tap row with the US look like playtime, isn't it?
Okay, that's one element of this row. Let's just look at the other one. And that was Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader. She's fully got behind an Australian-style ban on social media for under 16s. As part of the Laura Kuenssberg interview, I was quite struck yesterday that she confessed sort of what we all know, which is she can get sucked in to doom scrolling and, there's just endless watching of those shorts and reels and all the rest of it on Instagram. So she put her hand up and confessed to that. And she also says that in her household, she enforces an under 16s ban on social media. The phones that her kids have got pretty locked down, pretty draconian restrictions on those. But this is quite tricky, again, because it could upset the Americans, upset Elon Musk, something that this government and the previous one looked like they were unkeen to do. What did you make of that and how the support for that sort of is distributed politically?
One, interesting that Kemi Badenoch is really leaning into this. She sounds like she means it. As you point out, she talks about her own habits, her family's habits. So she's quite happy to stand up for that. Two, that gives her a dividing line with Nigel Farage, who takes a pretty laissez-faire stance so far on anything to do with social media and American big tech platforms. And then the big surprise backer of Kemi Badenoch, the X post you don't expect to read, one Andy Burnham taking to social media, for it is social media world, saying, I find myself agreeing with a lot of what Kemi Badenoch is saying about children and social media. It seems to me parents would welcome a cross-party consensus around much bolder action. Practically every word in that is really politically weighted and interesting, isn't it?
My goodness, that's quite stark. I have to say, some people's common sense is another people's Andy Burnham massively stirring the pot.
Surely not. But I thought it was really interesting also the tone in which Burnham came at this. He's very prone to a kind of wicked Tories rhetoric. Here, he sounds quite statesmanlike, doesn't he? Agreeing a lot with what Kemi Badenoch says, etc. And there's a swipe there at the overcautious leadership in Labour on this issue, which some might read as going wider in his critique of the way Keir Starmer and co run the government. But it is getting difficult, isn't it, for Labour? When you think about the sensitivities of criticising X, the fact that this debate is about under 16, so it's very reactive when it comes to children and children's safety online, and the fact that, frankly, a lot of MPs are getting very fed up with the X platform and are kind of agitating or fomenting for the government to distance itself from it.
There's a sort of slightly wider theme, I think, Anne, which is this government not being totally prepared to stand up to all things American, which has been growing ahead of steam in recent days, whether it is stand up more vocally to Donald Trump over Venezuela, whether it's stand up more explicitly over Minnesota. I mean, we would just say that was a matter for another country, or even that initial slightly squeamish response over Greenland later toughened up. MPs want to come out and condemn this stuff. And now, even on this, there appear to be some limits to where the government is prepared to go in parts of government, though Liz Kendall really blazing a bit of a trail in one element today. So it's something that is causing red on red. And, you know, there is a danger that given Liz Kendall sort of just raised the prospect of a ban, which I think is incredibly hard to deliver and is, as we say, a last resort. But nevertheless, we end up in a situation where Labour MPs are somewhat disappointed. So it's in that context that we've got the Andy Burnham intervention. But now we've mentioned the name Andy Burnham, and I just want to pause for a moment. We started the podcast pointing out that allies of Keir Starmer say that the threat to him has receded. But here we have Andy Burnham in the headlines. So I just want to do a little 3-question quiz for you. Right. Tomorrow, it's the Institute for Government annual conference. Who's the guest of honour?
Oh, you threw that one at me, curveball early. I'm just going to say, I don't know.
Let me put you out of your misery. It's Andy Burnham. Right, question 2. 7 days later, it's the Institute for Fiscal Studies conference. Who's the guest of honour?
I get some coach rolls on this. I think it's Andy Burnham.
Correct. Right, so you'll have no trouble working out who the third guest of honour is. Mid-February, it's the Resolution Foundation conference. And of course, their guest of honour is Andy Burnham. He is on the circuit, and he is decidedly on the circuit. Now, actually, in fairness to him, he's always been pretty available, but we care about this right now because of the wider context of the Prime Minister's political predicament. And it's in that context that I want to highlight something that is being talked up. It's being talked up in, modernising Labour right circles. And it's fear that Andy Burnham is on manoeuvres. He always denies it. He always says there's nothing in it. He gets quite fed up on social media at people speculating around this. But this is being pushed. This idea that I'm about to describe to you was being actively pushed last week. I spotted it in the Times this morning as well. So it's going around. And it is that we could, within weeks, see a situation where a Manchester MP stands down, maybe in March, and then Andy Burnham goes for that seat in elections that are timed for the May local and devolution national elections in Scotland and Wales. And even though Andrew Gwynn, who's one of the MPs that might stand down, has previously denied this, it's worth just pointing out this is worth watching because it's kind of a one-shot moment, right? And I had underappreciated this point, Anne. If Andy Burnham does not mount a challenge that coincides with the May election, the chances of losing the by-election that follows are so much higher, right? If you stand, and there are lots of other elections, Reform and the Tories and the Greens, their firepower and their ability to stop you being elected is just much smaller. If you have a standalone by-election, it's much easier for them all to gang up. And so there is a huge incentive, should he want to do it, for Andy Burnham to go along this timetable. So, basically confirmed in March, happen in May. So that's the context.
Well, it's certainly, if it does happen, Sam, it won't be for lack of speaking preparation on Andy Burnham's part, will it? Because he'll be shortly selling out the London Palladium at this rate. That's absolutely riveting. And it does make a case against that. Let's don't take any risks. Let's all be cautious here. Maybe if you're in the position of an Andy Burnham, that doesn't really calculate for you according to the way you're hearing it.
Well, let's wait and see. There's one other little sort of whisper in the conversations in Westminster at the moment, which is, of course, in order to become an MP, Andy Burnham would need to basically get the blessing of the Labour NEC and a particular Labour NEC subcommittee. And Keir Starmer has a majority on the NEC, even after that election by a hard left Unison General Secretary. He's still just about got control of that body. But, this is the interesting thing. The question being asked right now is, would Keir Starmer actually definitely stand in Andy Burnham's way? Or would he and the people on the NEC see having him back in Parliament, particularly as that being something that might calm the nerves of the soft left? And if Keir Starmer decides that, your enemy's enemy is your friend, and he decides he really doesn't like Wes Streeting, as some people suggest, then, although is denied by others, then could that be a way through? In the undergrowth, there's quite a toxic conversation about whether or not actually, when it comes to it, Keir Starmer doesn't try and block this in the way that we had been presuming. So on that tease, I think, and with an eye on the clock, I'm going to leave that with you as our final thought.
Sounds a bit like letting the wolf into the cottage in Red Riding Hood, but fascinating. Thanks, Sam.
Very good. Okay, that's it for Monday's Politics at Sam and Anne's. Lovely to see you for the first time this week. We will be back tomorrow for Tuesday's edition. See you then.
See you then.